Simon Cowell was about to ruin a child's life. He didn't know it, of course. He thought he was just doing his job. He thought he was judging another audition. He was wrong. What you are about to read isn't the story of a golden buzzer. It's not the story of a perfect performance. It's the story of a 10-year-old girl's scream, a scream that no one could hear, and the moment the toughest judge in the world, the man who built an empire on the word no, had to stop a multi-million-dollar show to apologize. Let's go back. It was 7 p.m. in the Pasadena Civic Auditorium, and the day had been a disaster. The air in the theater was thick and stale. It smelled of burnt coffee, industrial fog machines, and the collective disappointment of 36 failed auditions. The audience was restless. The crew was exhausted, and Simon Cowell was in a foul mood. He sat at the long judge's table, his arms crossed, a dark cloud hanging over him. He had just endured what he later called the terrible trio, a man who sang opera by gargling water, a dance troupe of 5 middle-aged men dressed as giant squirrels who were painfully out of sync, and, to cap it all off, a yodeler who sounded less like a Swiss mountaineer and more like a car alarm. Simon had hit his X buzzer so hard on the yodeler that the red light flickered. "I'm done," he said into his microphone, his voice a low, dangerous growl. I am so done." Howie Mandel, trying to lighten the mood, leaned over. "Come on, Simon, where's your sense of adventure?" "My sense of adventure," Simon snapped, "left about 3 squirrels ago. This is a waste of time. These people aren't talented. They're delusional. Can we please, just once, see someone who is actually good at something?" His patience was gone. The judge was gone. All that was left was the executioner, his hand hovering over the X for the next person unlucky enough to walk onto that stage. "All right," the stage manager's voice boomed over the PA, ignoring Simon's mood. "Next up, we have Lila and Sarah." The giant LED doors parted, and a woman and a little girl walked out. The woman, Sarah, looked to be in her late 30s, her face etched with a permanent, quiet anxiety. She was holding the hand of a 10-year-old girl, Lila. Lila was tiny. She was wearing a bright, sunshine yellow dress, which made her look even smaller and more fragile in the vast ocean of the stage. She wasn't holding a microphone. She was clutching a large, rolled-up canvas, holding it against her chest like a shield. They walked to the center X and stopped. The little girl, Lila, immediately hid behind her mother's leg. The audience, seeing the child, let out a collective, patronizing "aw." Simon Cowell did not. He just sighed. "Great, a kid. Now I have to be nice." "Hello," Simon said, his voice flat, drained of all energy. "What's your name?" The mother, Sarah, stepped forward, her hand protectively on her daughter's shoulder. "Hi, I'm Sarah, and this is my daughter, Lila." Lila peeked out from behind her mother's leg and gave a tiny, terrified wave. "And what are you going to do for us, Lila?" Heidi Klum asked, smiling. Lila didn't answer. She just clutched her canvas tighter. Her mother took a deep breath. Her voice was shaking. "Well, Lila doesn't speak." The studio fell silent. Simon's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed. He was listening. "3 years ago," Sarah continued, her hand trembling as she stroked her daughter's hair, we were in a bad car accident. It was traumatic, and she hasn't spoken a single word since. Selective mutism. The doctors, they said the trauma just locked her voice away." Sofia Vergara had her hand over her mouth. "Oh my God, that's terrible." "But," Sarah said, trying to smile, she found another way to talk. She speaks with this." She tapped the canvas Lila was holding. "Lila, she's a painter, and today she's going to paint her voice for you." The audience erupted in applause. This was it. The story, the comeback, the perfect, prepackaged Got Talent moment. Simon Cowell was not impressed. "Here it comes," his internal monologue sneered, the sob story, the emotional manipulation. "Now she's going to paint a pretty little flower or a rainbow. The audience will cry, and I'll be the monster who has to tell a 10-year-old mute girl that her flower isn't worth $1 million. I hate this. I truly, truly hate this part of the job." All right, Simon said, cutting through the applause. We have a 90-second timer. The stage is yours. Sarah nodded, kissed her daughter on the head, and whispered something in her ear. Lila nodded, her eyes wide with fear, and walked to the center of the stage. A crew member had already set up an easel and a table covered in paints and brushes. Lila stood in front of the blank canvas. She looked tiny, a little yellow dot in a sea of darkness. Timer starts now, the PA boomed. A frantic classical piece of music began to play. Flight of the Bumblebee, and Lila exploded. This was not painting. This was an attack. She grabbed a brush, her small hand shaking, and plunged it not into the bright yellow, or the blue, or the red. She grabbed the black. She grabbed the muddy, ugly brown. She grabbed the dark, sick-looking gray. Her movements were not graceful. They were violent. She wasn't painting strokes. She was stabbing the canvas. Thwack, thwack, thwack. The sound of the brush handle hitting the canvas echoed through the theater. The audience was completely silent. The awe was gone. This was disturbing. The judges' smiles were frozen. Then they just fell. Howie Mandel leaned forward, his face a mask of utter confusion. What what is she doing? Lila was frantic. She threw the brush down. She plunged both her hands up to the wrists into the pot of black paint. She began smearing it on the canvas, her small body shaking, her breathing ragged. The frantic music just made it worse. This wasn't art. This was a mess. A child making a mess. Simon Cowell just stared. His face was a mask of stone. The boredom was gone. Now it was just cold, hard judgment. This is not talent. This is a tantrum. This is what I was afraid of. The mother has put her traumatized child on national television to do this. This is exploitation. Bees the 90-second buzzer sounded. Lila froze. Her hands, covered in black and brown paint, were suspended in midair. She stepped back. The music stopped. The audience, the judges, everyone stared at the painting. It was awful. It was not a picture. It wasn't an abstract. It was just mud. A canvas covered from corner to corner in black, brown, and gray sludge. It was ugly. It was chaotic. It was nothing. A deep, painful, awkward silence filled the room. A few people in the front row clapped, but it was the quiet, polite, pitying clap that is worse than any boo. Lila stood next to her creation, her chest heaving. She was looking at the judges. Her eyes, they were desperate. She was waiting. Heidi Klum tried to smile. Well, that was a lot of energy, Lila. I don't really understand it. It's a no for me, sweetie. I'm sorry. Howie Mandel just shook his head. I I agree with Heidi. I don't get it. I'm sorry. It's a no. Sofia Vergara looked heartbroken. Lila, you are so brave, but this is not. I cannot say yes. I'm sorry. It all came down to Simon. Lila's eyes, wide and terrified, locked onto his. She was pleading. Simon Cowell looked at the painting. He looked at the child. He took a deep breath. He had to do this. He had to be the one to end it. He leaned into his microphone. His voice wasn't cruel. It was gentle, and that made it so much worse. Lila, he began, his voice soft, you you are a very, very brave girl, and what you've been through is unimaginable. He paused. But this is a talent show. We are looking for a talent. And this, he motioned to the muddy canvas. This is, I'm afraid this just isn't it. It's not, it's not talent. So, from me, it's a no. Thank you so much for coming. The audition was over, but the story was just beginning. Lila's face crumpled. It wasn't just sadness, it was betrayal. She looked at her mother in the wings, who had her hands over her face. She looked back at Simon, and she let out a scream, but no sound came out. It was a silent, agonizing, body-shaking gasp. Her mouth opened wide, her eyes squeezed shut. It was the sound of a heart breaking. Lila, sweetie, it's okay, Heidi started to say. But Lila wasn't listening. She turned to her painting, the mud, and with a rage that seemed impossible for a 10-year-old, she attacked it. She grabbed the easel and threw it forward. The painting crashed to the stage, face up. "Oh my God!" Sophia yelled. Lila wasn't done. She jumped on the canvas. She began stomping on it, her yellow dress flying, her small feet pounding the canvas. "Lila! Stop! Stop!" Her mother, Sarah, screamed, running from the wings, but Lila didn't stop. She was in a full-blown primal rage. She grabbed the canvas, lifted it, and tore it. She ripped the canvas straight down the middle. She threw the two pieces down, and then she just ran. She ran past her mother, past the stunned face of Terry Crews, and disappeared into the blackness of the backstage exit. The studio was in shock. The audience was speechless. The judges were on their feet. What just happened?" Howie asked. Sarah, the mother, was on her knees in the middle of the stage, sobbing over the destroyed painting. Simon Cowell felt sick. He had done this. His words had broken this child. "Ma'am," he started, his voice hollow. "Ma'am, I am so sorry. I didn't mean—" "You don't understand," Sarah suddenly screamed, her voice raw with grief. She wasn't talking to Simon, she was screaming at the world. You didn't look. You didn't see." "Ma'am," Simon said, standing up, his annoyance returning. "This was a mess. The audition is over. I think you should go and be with your daughter." "No!" Sarah yelled, scrambling on the floor. "You don't get it. You judged the paint. You were supposed to look inside." She was frantic. She was grabbing at the destroyed canvas. She was pulling at the torn edges. "What is she doing?" Heidi whispered. And then something spilled. From inside the torn canvas, something fell out. It wasn't paint. It wasn't glitter. It was letters. Hundreds of tiny, shimmering plastic letters, the kind kids use for crafts. They spilled out from between the canvas and the wooden frame where they had been hidden. They scattered all over the dark stage floor, mixing with the wet, black paint. Sarah, sobbing, began sweeping them together with her hands, her palms getting covered in the black mud. "Look!" she cried. "Look!" The spotlight, which had been on the judges, swung down. The cameraman zoomed in. The letters, they weren't random. They spelled something. The light hit them, and the audience, as one, gasped. On the dark stage floor, in a chaotic pile of torn canvas and black paint, the tiny, shimmering letters spelled out a message. IMAFRAID. The theater stopped. Time stopped. Simon Cowell stopped breathing. His brain, it couldn't process. He looked at the muddy, destroyed painting. He looked at the letters on the floor. And in one horrifying, soul-crushing second, he understood. The painting, the mud. It wasn't the art. The mud was the prison. The child hadn't been painting a picture. She had been painting her feelings, the black, the gray, the chaos, the trap, and the art, the real art, the real voice, was the message she had hidden inside. "I'm afraid Sarah wept, looking up at Simon, her face a mask of tragedy. She told me, "Mommy, I'm going to paint how I feel, trapped and dark, but I'm going to put my voice inside, and I'm going to break it open for them." The room was spinning. Lila's tantrum, it wasn't a tantrum, it was the finale. She was breaking herself free. She was showing them the message. And Simon had stopped her. He had rejected her, and before she could finish, he had seen a child making a mess, not a child giving a testimony. He was a judge. He was a millionaire. He was a star maker. He was the smartest man in every room he'd ever been in, and he was a fool. He was wrong, utterly, completely, devastatingly wrong. He hadn't just X'd an act, he had X'd a 10-year-old child's cry for help. His words, "This is not talent," they echoed in his head. He felt vile. "Simon?" Howie's voice was a million miles away. Simon didn't answer. He stood up. He pushed his chair back so hard it almost toppled over. He ignored the judges. He ignored the audience. In the control booth, the producers were screaming into his earpiece. "Simon, we are on a schedule. Simon, sit down. We need to go to commercial." He reached up and ripped his earpiece out. He threw it on the table. "Stop," he said, his voice a low command. "What?" The producer's voice crackled from the main PA. "Stop the taping," Simon commanded. "Stop the audience. Stop everything now." And he walked off the stage. He didn't walk, he ran. A single handheld camera, breaking all protocol, jumped off its platform and ran after him. Simon disappeared into the dark concrete labyrinth of the backstage area. "Lila!" he called out. His voice was no longer a judge's. It was a father's. "Lila!" He found her. She was huddled in a cold, concrete stairwell. Her yellow dress was stained with black paint. She was curled into a tiny ball, her face against her knees, her small body shaking with silent sobs. The cameraman, breathing heavily, raised his camera. Simon saw him. He held up one hand. "Stop. Turn it off." "Simon, it's the story," the cameraman pleaded. "I said turn it off," Simon ordered, his voice terrifying. "Get out." The cameraman lowered the camera and left. And Simon Cowell, the toughest judge in the world, was left alone in a stairwell with a broken 10-year-old girl. He didn't know what to do. He was a man of words, sharp words, funny words, cruel words. But words had done this, so he didn't speak. He just sat down. He sat on the cold, dusty concrete floor a few feet away from her. He leaned his head back against the wall. He didn't try to touch her. He didn't try to comfort her. He just sat with her. He sat in the silence. For 1 minute, 2 minutes, 5. The silence in that stairwell was more powerful than any golden buzzer. Finally, Lila, she stopped shaking. She slowly lifted her head. She looked at him. Her eyes were red and puffy. She was still terrified. Simon, he looked back, and he gave her a small, sad, broken smile. He didn't say, "I'm sorry." He didn't say, "It's okay." He held out his hand, palm up, and after a long, long second, the 10-year-old girl, she uncurled, and she put her tiny, paint-stained hand into his. The show did not go to commercial. 10 minutes later, Simon Cowell walked back onto the stage. He was holding Lila's hand. The audience, who had been sitting in stunned silence, stood up and they began to clap, not for a performance, but for this. Simon led Lila back to her mother, who was now standing by the judges' table. He hugged the mother. Then he sat back down in his chair. He looked exhausted. He looked changed. Lila stood with her mom, her hand still clutching Simon's. I, Simon began, his voice hoarse. I have to apologize to you, Lila, and to you, Sarah. He looked at the audience. I made a mistake, a terrible mistake. I was judging a painting. I wasn't listening. He looked at Lila. Lila, what you did today is the single bravest thing I have ever seen in my life. He looked at the other judges. We're not voting. Howie and Heidi were just nodding, crying. We don't have a prize for this, Simon said, his voice breaking. We don't. This is beyond our show. But I will make you a promise, Sarah, and you, Lila. This show, I will personally pay for the greatest art therapist in this country. We will get you the help. We will make sure you get to heal. He looked at the little girl, his eyes filled with a profound respect. You are a yes. You are a yes for life. Thank you for teaching me. The story doesn't end there. This is where it begins. When the episode aired, it changed the conversation. The clip wasn't shared as a talent video. It was shared as a mental health PSA. It became the most talked about moment of the season, not because of a high note, but because of a silent scream. And Simon Cowell, he kept his promise. The show, America's Got Talent, they didn't just give her a yes, they gave her a voice. They connected Sarah and Lila with one of the top childhood trauma specialists in the world, a doctor who specialized in art therapy. The show didn't just move on, they followed up. In the season finale, 3 months later, they didn't open with a pop star. They opened with a painting. They showed a short film. It was Lila in a quiet, sunlit room with her new therapist. She was painting, but this time she wasn't using black. She wasn't using brown. She was using yellow and blue and red. The film ended with her holding up her new painting. It it wasn't a masterpiece. It was just a flower, a simple, small, bright yellow flower. Under it, in a child's handwriting, was one word: thank you. In an interview months later, a reporter asked Simon about that moment. Simon, she said, you found some of the biggest stars in the world. Where does that moment with Lila rank? Simon, he didn't give his usual witty answer. He was quiet for a long time. He looked down, and he shook his head. You spend your life building an empire, he said, his voice thick. You spend your life thinking, you you know everything, and then a 10-year-old girl in a yellow dress comes comes onto your stage, and in 90 seconds she she teaches you that that nothing. He looked up. His eyes were red. That that wasn't a yes for a talent. It was a yes for courage. My job. I thought my job was to find stars. He shook his head again. It's not. My job, my only job is to listen, even when the person isn't saying a word. That night, the music stopped, the judges stopped, the show stopped. A 10-year-old girl who couldn't speak tore her world apart, and in the silence, she finally taught the entire world how to listen.